you know, sometimes in the middle of songs, that people would be so overcome. I mean, he reached people. This is a guy that could sell out Madison Square Garden twice, you know, 2 nights in a row without a record out.
Now, I'm on my way, I know I am. But times were when I thought not.
But the more adulation the star received, the more he withdrew. Like many in his generation, Cat was seeking answers to his growing sense of spiritual emptiness. He explored Eastern religions and New Age philosophies, topics he'd been interested in for years.
My search was going on at the same time as I was playing, you know, 40,000 seaters in Houston, you know, and that kind of paradox was with me. In a way, throughout my life, I had this kind of, you know, this ability to kind of cross thresholds.
Keen to step out of the mainstream, he left England and his usual studio team to record an album in Jamaica with session musicians. Released in July of '73, the aptly titled Foreigner sold well, but alienated many critics.
You say you want to seek the truth, but it's hard to find.
In early '74, short-haired Cat Stevens took a break from recording and traveled to Ethiopia as a goodwill ambassador for Unicef. The objective of his trek was to garner much-needed publicity for the UN's project to aid sick and starving children.
No one to help you, your friends don't have the time. Hey, hey, hey.
Upon his return from Africa, a wandering Cat Stevens went back into the studio. Reunited with Paul Samwell Smith and guitarist Alan Davies, he recorded an album with a more familiar sound, but the title reflected a man increasingly torn between two worlds.
I was traveling on some plane to a gig, and I had my little sort of icon, sort of Buddha statue thing, which I used to carry around with me, and I had a chocolate box in the other hand, so I said, look at that, you know. And if I was to die in this plane, you know, where would I be between the material and the spiritual?
Oh no, don't say those same idle lies.
Cat Stevens was more than a big star. He was a big business. And after recording and touring non-stop for nearly 5 years, he was exhausted.
I'm sure I was pretty difficult to be with sometimes because, you know, I was looking for my identity and I was a chameleon.
In his constant quest for answers, Cat latched on to another philosophy, numerology, which seeks to explain the mysteries of the universe through mathematics.
Why was I born and I'm cursed repeatedly?
The experience inspired the ambitious concept album he called Numbers. Released in October 1975, it sold quite well, but was far from radio-friendly, and record executives were left wondering where all the hits had gone.
Would know if I should die, no one needed me.
At one time, Jerry Moss said it just sounds as if he's finding much more difficulty getting a song out, you know, because there'd be all kind of arrangements and complications, and then even the album graphics, everything became much more complicated.
In 1975, just before he was to undertake another major tour, an anxious Cat Stevens visited Jerry Moss at his home in Malibu.
I think we were hoping it was going to be a nicer day, you know, and somehow it didn't turn out that way. It was pretty much like this kind of day.
With his hosts inside preparing for lunch, Cat decided to go swimming. But just as he swam beyond the surf, he was caught in a current and pulled out to sea.
Suddenly I realized I was fighting the ocean, and the tide was going that way, and I wasn't getting any closer. The fear of death struck me, and I suddenly held myself and I said, oh God, if you save me, I'll work for you. And at that moment, a wave pushed me forward, and suddenly I was swimming back with all the energy that I needed, and I was back on land. And I thank God.
On that fateful day, Cat Stevens made a solemn promise that he would repay God for sparing his life, but he had no idea how he'd fulfill it.
I was just grateful to still be here, because I was a lover of life.
You know, and I still hadn't worked it out. And now I was given a chance. Second chance.
Miles from nowhere. Yes, I'll take my time. Oh, yeah. To reach there.
For nearly a year, he waited for a sign. It came in the form of a gift from his brother David.
He just traveled to Jerusalem, and I suppose it was a mini sort of spiritual journey for him. But it's amazing that he discovered another religion.
I kind of almost tripped into it by going to the Dome on the Rock, which is the mosque there. I gave my brother the Quran because I felt there was something very special in the religion of Islam. He sat there and he read this thing, and he doesn't do anything lightheartedly.
And what he discovered in the Quran is a faith that he says is more familiar than foreign. Kat was learning that, like Christians and Jews, Muslims worship the one God of Abraham.
When I first started reading the Quran, it wasn't a sudden, you know, bursting light. It wasn't like that. But it was, in a way, an immediate revelation that the first name that I read in the Quran was God's name. You know, I never knew that Muslims believed in God. One of the things that really surprised me, which made me feel very at home, was finding the names of all the prophets that I've read in the Bible.
For the next year, Cat Stevens privately studied the Quran. Unlike his earlier explorations, this spiritual journey was one he seemed intent on completing.
Come on now, it's freedom calling. Come on over and find yourself.
To me, it was just a new awakening. And things which I've been writing about, you know, come on now, it's freedom calling. Come on over and find yourself. You know, I was now saying to myself, well, perhaps I'm being confronted with something that I didn't expect to find in my lifetime. You know, possibly the truth.
Cat Stevens was a man in the midst of profound change when he set out on the tour he called Magic Hat in November 1975.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax and take it easy. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to know. Find a girl.
6 months later, he played his final show of the tour in Greece. Due to a scheduling mix-up, Cat performed to a half-empty auditorium. The Magic Hat tour came to an abrupt end.
And I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
I gave up, plugged out my guitar and just walked off stage.
Okay.
Shortly after finishing Father and Son, he basically stopped off.
And that cost me a lot of money as well, but it satisfied my ego.
And that was effectively the last concert we ever did.
Inspired by the Quran, Cat Stevens was gradually moving toward the Islamic faith. In early 1977, his spiritual journey continued when he traveled to Jerusalem.
There I was, in the middle of, you know, this holy city, walking into this mosque. And I think some Muslims came up to me because, you know, they'd had some problem before, people walking in and trying to cause damage to the mosque. They came up to me and they said, who are you? I think that was the first time that I said, I'm a Muslim.
Translated from Arabic, a Muslim is one who surrenders to God. Stevens was about to do just that, fulfilling the promise he'd made after surviving a brush with death in the waters off Malibu. But for a time, Cat Stevens would drift between the worlds of faith and fame.
I was on the road, sleeping between lorry lights, all stone drunk and cold.
In April '77, he released Is It So? The album harkened back to his earlier work, But songs like I Never Wanted to Be a Star clearly expressed his growing weariness with the trappings of stardom.
I think